What happens when a big budget developer actually takes the time to kind of fix their game? Well, you get Need for Speed Carbon Own the City. So yes, welcome back to the worst racing games, the series where you guys comment racing games that you think are terrible, I review and rank them. Now, I was quite surprised to see this one pop up, as I'd heard Need for Speed Carbon on PSP was actually the best of the bunch. So let's dive into it to see if you guys are right or if this game is just simply misunderstood. The PSP port of Need for Speed Carbon, titled Own the City, was developed by Team Fusion, which were a subdivision of EA Canada specifically designed to develop PSP ports of Need for Speed games. The game released in various regions across October to December of 2006, and would differ greatly from its home console counterpart with a completely different story and a different map where it takes place. So before we talk about the actual gameplay of Carbon, we do have to talk about that story, because I'm not gonna lie, it's kinda wild. So to cut quite a long story short, the game opens with you, your brother and a couple of other racers racing to decide who owns the city. Suddenly there's a massive car crash, it puts you in the hospital with amnesia, and sadly your brother Mick passes away. You then eventually wake up to be greeted by Mick's girlfriend Sarah and his loyal wingman Carter, and eventually you re-enter the street racing scene to find out who killed Mick. No, let's not go to the police, let's just keep racing till we reach the person that killed him. Now, this already sounds wild enough, but the very big twist towards the end of the game, and spoiler warning here if you haven't played, is that you, the player, are the one who actually planned your brother's death. Because apparently Mick was a terrible person who terrorized his girlfriend Sarah, and you, the player. There obviously is a lot more to it along the way, but that's pretty much as simplified as I can make it for you, and even then it's still crazy. So once you've completed the introduction to the game, you now have 3 different options for your very first car. You have the Mazda Speed 3, the Nissan 240SX, and a Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution. And of course we have to go for that Mitsubishi. The game then asks for your name and to create a name for your gang, so I am Kledge and these are the Kledgens. Sorry, that was terrible. And now it's time to own the city. So the game's map is divided up into several different areas with different gangs owning each of those areas, so you have to go through, complete a bunch of races and challenge the gang leader of that area to take it over for your gang. With the end game obviously being you owning the entire city and finding out who killed Mick. So what are the controls like when you actually get into a race? So to accelerate you hold the X button and to brake you hold the square button. You can steer either using the D-pad or the circle nub above it, which I personally prefer. When you eventually unlock boost, you can use the left bumper to boost and you can use the right bumper to do a handbrake turn. Then when you have wingmen, you can activate them using either the circle or the triangle buttons, which I will explain more in a little bit. So I previously covered Most Wanted 510, the last game from this developer, and I have to say the handling in that game was not great at all, but I'm pleased to say that it is actually a lot better here. You feel like you have more control, there's a better sense of speed, handling corners is a lot better than it was previously. Overall, it's a pretty decent improvement. There's still some wonky moments, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it's pretty solid in terms of handling. So yes, within your races you will also be able to access something called the wingman mechanic. So you can have up to 2 wingmen in a race, and they will be able to give you a variety of different benefits. You'll have one which is called a drafter, so he can pull up in front of you and give you a speed boost. You have brawlers, which will just target a racer of your choice and crash into them. And then you have assassins, which also target anyone you choose, but instead of crashing into them, they pull along in front and put a spike trap in front to blow their tires. Now, this feature was not in the main Carbon game and is honestly a little bit strange, but works quite well. 90% of the time, both of your wingmen should be behind you at any point in the race. There's the odd moment where the AI is a bit stupid and crashes into something, but they will rubber band quite quickly and catch up again. So they're quite useful to have around, especially to get speed boosts later on into the game. Some of these wingmen also have a different benefit that come with them as well, such as temporarily making your car faster for that race. As you make your way through and take over various gang territories, gang members of the gangs who had it before will request to join you, and if you have so many respect points, then you can hire them into your crew. When the game first introduced this mode to me in the tutorial, I honestly thought that was going to be the only time I'd use this feature, but it's actually pretty well developed and is very useful in game. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of Need for Speed or just racing games in general, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. It would be greatly appreciated. So what game modes do you actually get in Own the City? Well, you've got a few standard race modes. So you have a circuit mode, which is just lap racing. There's a sprint mode that's just, well, a sprint from one point to the next. And then you have lap eliminators, where an opponent gets eliminated who's in last at the end of each lap. There are also a few other types of game mode here, including time trials, and then there's one where you have to escape a gang's territory within a certain time, except that's done within the open world and you just have to follow an arrow, kind of like the Crazy Taxi arrow. That's surprisingly difficult because you have all the gang members trying to take you off the road as well. There's also a delivery game mode, which again takes place in the open world where you follow an arrow, where you and the rival crew have to be the first to deliver a package to a certain destination. And we're not even done there, because there's also a takedown mode. And when I saw this, I got quite excited because I'm a massive fan of Burnout, and I thought, oh, takedowns, wonderful, this should be fun. No, it's not very well implemented. It feels very janky. The collision detection isn't the greatest, and it just doesn't really work. Unfortunately, you can't really avoid this either, because even if you don't choose to do these when you're taking on the territories, certain boss races involve having to do takedowns first anyway. It's a bit strange because they were definitely on the right track towards having a functioning decent game mode for this, but it feels like they just stopped halfway. Even if I don't ram a car and I just pull up alongside it and make sure there's some form of contact, their health will quite significantly decrease, which doesn't really make any sense because that would just realistically do some mild cosmetic damage. I don't know, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's certainly not worth trying either. Now, we do just have to take a minute to discuss the AI racers in this game. In Most Wanted 510, they were incredibly rubber bandy to the point where it was very much so cheating, but they were also simultaneously incredibly stupid. And thankfully that's not quite as problematic in this game. Sure, there are some moments where both friendly AI racers and your enemies will just clip into random objects in the environment and crash, but for the most part, they're pretty clever. The rubber banding is still kind of obvious here, but there's nothing that feels like the game is cheating. That means there's just some moments where the rivals feel like they're better drivers than you are, which is definitely the case because I was not that good. Now, it wouldn't be an episode of Worst Racing Games without discussing a potentially wonky physics engine, and weirdly, it actually isn't that bad here either. There weren't really any moments within my playthrough where I crashed and felt like it probably wasn't my fault, because it was probably just because I was going way too fast into a corner. When you get airtime, it doesn't feel impossible to land or to drive away from, so for the most part it's a pretty solid physics engine. So let's discuss some of the design aspects of Own the City. So the car models themselves, I have to say, look really good. Bearing in mind this is a 2006 game for the PSP, the reflections on the in-game models are very well done. And on top of these nice looking base models, you also get a very nice set of customization options to play with as well, a variety of body kits, spoilers, decals, crew logos, so on and so forth, as well as a fair amount of performance upgrades. The city that you are racing in is called Coast City, but it's basically just a reskinned version of Rockport from Need for Speed Most Wanted. The map itself is fairly dull, to be honest with you, looking fairly uninspired and quite boring in terms of visuals. It's not the ugliest thing ever, but you can see they had to put a lot more effort into making the cars look good, rather than the world around you. Which also leads me on to my main complaint about this game, and that is just the boring tracks. A lot of races throughout the game's story reuses the same sets of tracks, and after you've done them once or twice, they do get quite boring, especially the ones that are predominantly focused on a motorway. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of these tracks, but when it's just the same ones getting repeated over and over throughout the hours and hours of the game, it just loses any fun that it could have had. In terms of sound design, all the cars sound pretty nice, but the main standout for sound in this game is the licensed soundtrack. With a nice variety of genres from various different artists including Wolfmother, Pharrell, Grandmaster Flash, so on and so forth. So what was the response to Need for Speed Carbon Own the City? Well, the Metacritic score for the game was a 73 out of 100, which isn't the lowest by any means we've ever seen, but it's certainly not the highest either. Review scores from critics varied from 87 out of 100 all the way down to 60. but this was one of the lowest scoring versions of the game. The user score for this game is in a similar field with a 7.7 out of 10, with reviews ranging from a 10 out of 10 all the way down to a 3 out of 10 from various different users. Personally, I can see why people don't like this game, but this certainly isn't the worst racing game ever made, and isn't even the worst Need for Speed game on PSP. As well as reviewing fairly well, the game would also go on to sell a lot of copies, with over 2 million copies sold for the PSP. These figures are from VG charts. So now the time has come to rank this game in our worst racing games tier list. Now yes, this game does have a few flaws, but for the most part it's a pretty solid arcade racer for the PSP. Which means yes, after 8 episodes we have our first entry into the actually not that bad. If you disagree with this entry, fair enough, we're all entitled to our own opinions about this game, that's why I make these videos so we can discuss them in the comments. But having played Most Wanted 510 on the PSP, there's no way this is as bad as that is. So that takes us to the end of our look at Need for Speed Carbon Own the City, and to the end of this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. Now, where would you rank Own the City in this tier list? Would you rank it differently? What do you think of it? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, if you have a suggestion for a worst racing game, pop it down in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with the Worst Racing Games series. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.